it even mean to be mutant in the Ultimate Universe? From the original Ultimate of Earth 1610 and beyond to the new Ultimate reality of Earth 6160, let's talk about that. The premise for the new Ultimate Universe, Earth 6160, is that the Maker has made it all from scratch with his ideals at its core. The universe is ruled in secret by its own villainous version of the Illuminati, and the Maker made this reality with the intention of it not really having any superheroes. So already we're off to a rough start for our X-Men who, despite the title of their comic, Ultimate X-Men, do not seemingly exist. At least not at the start, or at least not as far as we know. Clearly, based on the title, we're diving into a world where our heroes will somehow come to be and exist in some form, but just what their role will be, well, it's still a little too early to tell. Based on my familiarity with their previous work with Marvel in regards to the creators behind this series, Peach Momoko and her script adapter Zach Davison, I'm sure it will be very different from what we've come to expect when it comes to our X-Men stories. Let me know what some of your favorite unexpected X-Men stories have been in the comments. For me, Peach Momoko is definitely one of the tops. Definitely! If you haven't read Demon Days, do yourself a favor, go do that. Back to the original Ultimate reality of Earth 1610 though now. Jean Grey has a complex history when it comes to the Ultimate Comics, the original Ultimate Comics. But one of the most bizarre character shifts for her happens during World War X. She goes from being a mutant on the run, living under the identity of Karen Grant, to kind of a fascist leader who attempts to forcefully unite Tian and Utopia, willing to do anything to make this happen, even some honestly pretty sinister stuff. I mean, I know Jean has had her moments on Earth 616, but this was a character shift that not only was a change from her usual characterization in the main continuity, but even honestly felt like a shift from her Earth 1610 self, especially when you consider the Phoenix isn't involved in turning her dark here. At least as far as I can tell. The mutants on Earth 616 were different from the Ultimate X-Men of Earth 1610 in a big way. A really big way. Like the biggest way that you could ever imagine possible. They would learn that they weren't exactly as different from the humans as they originally thought. Instead, they learned that the X gene in their bodies actually came from a version of the super soldier serum, which they'd been exposed to through the water supply. This meant that they weren't an evolution of man, but instead were more like a rogue science experiment. This revelation was a massive one for one mutant in particular. That mutant, Magneto. Magneto had built an ideology around the fact that mutants should rise against humans and rule over them as their race was, in essence, superior. An interesting take for someone who lived through World War II and experienced persecution during that time. But hey, I digress, that's how the story goes. Magneto learning that humans and mutants weren't really that different and that mutants weren't an evolution of mankind shattered much of what he had built his ideology on, breaking him in a way. Something different that I feel like it would do to him in 616 as well, just based on what his beliefs are like forged on. Wolverine's power set is also very different in the Ultimate Universe than it is in the mainstream one. On Earth 1610, Wolverine's powers are a little more loosey-goosey, if you will. And in a way they could be seen as more powerful considering they aren't as clearly understood or defined. It's believed that Wolverine doesn't actually have a healing factor here, but instead has, how do I want to put this, survival powers, which allow him to mutate in whichever way he needs to ultimately survive. This means you could technically remove his head from his body and he could just keep on surviving, or separate his torso from his lower half and he'd also just keep going on. Both of these events have pretty much happened to him in the comics and he's shown to survive them. That's why I use them here. However, on the other hand, some may see this as a weaker version of his power set, considering Wolverine doesn't really have the possibility to regrow his limbs at all, although even in, honestly, on Earth 616, that isn't always something he can do anyways. It kind of depends on who's writing him and how boosted he is at that time in terms of his powers. Instead, he has to find his body parts here and assemble them once more if he wants to be whole again. However, he also doesn't need those body parts to survive, so When it comes to this next change, I actually kind of love this shift. Well, I love this shift in some ways. I love the character that we got out of it. I don't love the weird family history behind it as much though, which is bizarre. We're talking about Jimmy Hudson. Jimmy Hudson is Wolverine's secret son. He was taken in by a friend of Wolverine's who he served alongside in the war. Logan figured that Jimmy would have a better life with the Hudsons. When his powers manifested, not knowing his true parentage, Jimmy was pretty confused. He would eventually be visited by Kitty Pryde, who would give Jimmy some of his father's effects, allowing Jimmy to learn the truth of who his biological father really was. But who was Jimmy's mom? Why, of course, none other than the wife of Magneto, Magda Lencher. I'm sorry, what? Instead of the SHI'AR being an alien race in the Ultimate X-Men comics set in the reality of Earth 1610, the SHI'AR here is more of a church that is guided by supposed alien knowledge. Lilandra Naramani is still the Magistrix here, but instead she is the Magistrix of the church as opposed to, you know, the SHI'AR Galactic Empire. She is the church's leader. Yeah. It's weird. The church was built around the idea that an alien god would one day return, which would bring about a great shift in the universe, creating a new utopia for all. In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, the Phoenix Force was much more than an extremely ancient and powerful entity. It was believed to be the god that had created all life. Yeah, on Earth 1610, Phoenix is some one above all level kind of being, or is believed to be that anyway. It's believed that the Phoenix created all life, and as life evolved, it became jealous of their god, the Phoenix, and sought to imprison her. The Phoenix Force, or Phoenix God if you prefer, is the entity that the Church of SHI'AR Enlightenment worships, seeing the Phoenix God as a savior who will one day be reborn in a human and basically bring about a universal utopia. They believe, of course, that Jean is this destined host, because of course, why not? And of course, she does become the Phoenix. That part at least is similar to the Earth 616 narrative, so many of us are familiar with. However, the role of the Phoenix here is somewhat changed, I would say. As if the Phoenix Force wasn't powerful enough, of course, the Ultimate Comics just had to make her a god too, that like created all things. Granted, that's just what some people believe, so who knows? Probably not, because the one above all, I believe, is on a greater scheme of the multiverse the creator of all things. Pretty sure. I promise this is my last point concerning the Phoenix, but I just find this whole shift of it being a god who's worshipped by a church named after the SHI'AR to just be so strange. It's so weird. You know the evil gathering of rich weirdos who like to run the world from behind the scenes and also cosplay as Victorian villains? Well, in the Ultimate Comics, this group is not just a mutant villain group, but is also closely tied to the Church of SHI'AR Enlightenment. That's right, we're talking about the HELLFIRE Club, baby. Because they're attached to the church for some reason. In this version, the HELLFIRE Club's origins extend well beyond their founding in the mid-18th century, all the way back to the days of ancient Egypt, where they once worshipped the Phoenix God. However, the HELLFIRE Club ended up being split off from the church, instead becoming a separate sect based on the belief that the destructive nature of the Phoenix God would bring with it great power should the Phoenix be freed. So they want to like free the Phoenix so it can destroy everything, and then they'll get power. I suppose. Everything leads back to the Phoenix here. In a way, it's kind of neat to see all the threads, but in another way, it feels like a bit much to have everything come together just so neatly. It's both something I like and something that kind of irks me in general about the Ultimate Universe, having that retrospective on many of the working parts in Marvel that allows everything to feel like it's part of a grander design, because we're building it sort of after the fact as opposed to it kind of tumbling one thing after the other, which is how it organically happens in 616. I mean, it's neater, but do we all want it to be neater? I don't know. Mr. Sinister has a completely different vibe in the Ultimate Universe. He is still an X-Men villain, but instead of teaming up with another X-Men villain, who is the biggest bad around, Apocalypse, who also basically makes Nathaniel Essex into what he is, Nathaniel instead works for Spider-Man villain Norman Osborn, experimenting on himself to modify his genes and grant himself superpowers as he worked on creating his basically own psionic brand of the super soldier serum. He gained powers but lost his sanity and began to hallucinate visions of Lord Apocalypse, who commanded him. Eventually, he would also seemingly transform into Lord Apocalypse, but be revealed to still exist beneath Apocalypse's exterior when he goes up against the Phoenix. Not to say that Sinister was ever fully sane on Earth 616 or anything like that, but on Earth 1610, he's kind of a whole other level of mad scientist, if you ask me. Also, all of his tattoos. Super tatted up Sinister. Because it's Ultimate Comics and we gotta be edgy. Okay, I don't want to get into spoilers for the new Ultimate stuff too much since it just came out, but I do want to talk about it a little bit more because I've been waiting so long to talk about it, so I'm gonna use this list as an opportunity. So we know that the X-Men seemingly don't exist in the Ultimate Universe of Earth 6160 just yet. At least, you know, like I said, not as far as we know. I mean, I haven't read everything, so maybe I don't think they exist yet, so I'm just gonna say that. So the question remains of what the first issue of this comic is going to be about. Well, if you've seen the previews, you may have known what to expect somewhat in terms of the tone here. here. But something I don't think any of us were expecting is the seeming redefinition of what it means to be mutant in this new Ultimate universe. At least that's what I'm picking up. The tone is also a huge and honestly super interesting shift for me, but also just the reshaping and framing of mutant experience is super fascinating and just different. I'm not sure where exactly it's going yet. I'm a little like, what's happening? But boy, oh boy, I am here for this ride. I don't understand it, but I love it anyways, you know what I mean? And if you haven't checked it out yet, I'd highly recommend you do Ultimate X-Men issue number 1, and when you do, share your thoughts with us in the comments, because I'd love to talk to you about it. I love talking mutants, but that's about it for this one. I'm your host, Amanda McKnight, and until next time, you stay nerdy, YouTube.